Week 2. Uma was released on March 18th, written and directed by Iris K. Shim, and stars Sandra Oh, best known for Grey's Anatomy, and Fievel Stewart. Amanda, a Korean immigrant, and Chrissy, her daughter, live in an isolated farmhouse with no electricity. Strange things start to appear after Amanda's uncle arrives and delivers the ashes of her abusive mother. The film has some very effective imagery and good scares, combined with an impressive performance from the two leads. It explores generational trauma and the fear of becoming one's parents in a way that is effective and suitably horrifying. While there are definitely some tropey moments, it leans away from them and embraces a mother-daughter relationship that's rarely seen. In general, the characters act very human, and there's no living antagonist. It does run a little long, and the same scares are repeated a few times, losing their effectiveness. That and the supernatural events are confirmed to be real, which was unnecessary, as before the final act, they worked perfectly fine as manifestations of grief and an understandable response to trauma. The effects themselves are fairly solid, although mostly CG. The lighting, however, is a step above, with good contrast between brightness and darkness, creating some very intense moments. The ending's a bit of a letdown, but it is a natural end point for the film, so it's not as off the rails as many horror films can be. It's a very deliberate film, and while there are a few missteps, it's still worth a watch. Master went to wide release the same day, written and directed by Mariama Diallo. It stars Regina Hall and Zoe Renee. Jasmine is a freshman at Ancaster, an elite university in New England. She experiences difficulty adjusting to the new setting, and things become even grimmer when the local ghost story starts to become real. The film is a study in prejudice, both racial and class, but special attention is paid to the black protagonist's experiences. The local haunt is due to a hate crime, a lynching of the first African American to go to the school, and this background is repeated ad nauseum, with many of the scares depicting events that she went through or similar hate. There are many comparisons to be made between this and the Candyman remake, especially in their heavy-handedness. Unfortunately, the film just isn't particularly interesting. Not a lot happens, and when things do happen, there's no real follow-up. The main difference from a typical high school hell plot is having one of the professors as a secondary protagonist. This does offer a different view on things, but ultimately, while the racial themes are well-intentioned and certainly relevant, especially the prejudices in academia, it's just boring. In terms of direction and acting, they're all decent, and well enough done for this kind of film, but nothing stands out. It's just middling in most ways, and that betrays the themes, because the rest of the film becomes a bit of a chore, and this is not recommended. Next was Choose or Die, previously known as Cursor, which came out on April 15th on Netflix. It was directed and written by Toby Minkins, and stars Viola Evans and Asa Butterfield, who is best known for Hugo or Ender's Game. In it, Kayla discovers a choose-your-own-adventure game in the style of Zork, but it turns out to be cursed and affects reality, forcing people to kill themselves. She has to survive the game and discover the origins of the murderous software. A lot of the set pieces have been done before, and the altering reality aspect only really comes into play in one significant encounter out of 5, but there's still some life to this 80s-inspired adventure. The premise itself certainly takes center stage, and is the reason to continue watching, just to see what sort of absurdity evolves from this cursed game. The ending is a bit of a letdown in this regard, unfortunately, with it devolving into a bizarre who can kill yourself the best contest, but the strangeness at least makes it more memorable than a standard fight the evil entity in the game world that it could be building towards. This is not a good film. The effects and acting vary between good and awful, and the script has very little going for it, especially in character development or compelling moments, but there's something about it that sticks with you. It takes itself too seriously, but as a viewer, if you embrace it, it can definitely be worth your time. Titanic 666 premiered on the same day on Tubi. It's a sequel to Titanic 2 and was released by The Asylum. The title and company should offer all the information you need to know about whether it's something for you or not. The premise is they've created the Titanic 3, a modern luxury cruise ship but with all the decorations of the original. Unfortunately, the great-granddaughter of the captain has snuck aboard and summoned the vengeful ghosts of the dead crew to take revenge for exploiting history. The main storyline involves Leodama from Battlestar Galactica, with a bad English accent, trying to sail antiquities they have excavated from the original wreck. Every line of dialogue hints that these are actually replicas, or fakes. From the extra hired security, talks about bribes, and how shifty he is, but this all turns out to be nothing, as they did actually rescue these artifacts, as the ghosts try to reclaim their jewelry and similar. The effects date back to the PS2 era, and characters, including an influencer couple who appears to be the main characters, disappear without traces. The way the ghosts kill varies, but it mostly involves opening their mouths wide and then just sucking energy out. Bad acting, bad scripts, bad effects. There's nothing of interest here, just like every other Asylum movie. They're trying to make bad films, and they're succeeding. They actually released 14 this year, although only 4 are properly horror. A single release of theirs demonstrates the quality they produce in everything, however. Room 203 was released on April 15th, directed and adapted by Ben Jaeger from a Japanese novel. It's the first feature for the cast, but stars Francesca Zureb and Victoria Winiarski. The basic plot is a pair of college friends move into an old apartment building, but soon strange things start happening in the night, and it seems like the place may be cursed. There's a lot of generic spookiness happening, strange noises, blood coming out of the walls, mysterious presence, as well as a basement they're not allowed to go into. The scares are all as by the book as they can be, with the expected jump scares, relatively bloodless deaths, and exposition-heavy scenes when the plot needs it. The main girls also seem to be queer-coded. The more rebellious one is shown to be bisexual, but it's never addressed beyond that. There's nothing wrong with the film. It's directed competently, the effects are decent, and the acting is fine. The only thing missing is a hook. There's nothing to separate it from the dozens of films with the exact same basic plot. That is, a couple moves into a new location, and it turns out to be haunted, or cursed, or cultists. Of the 12 films discussed so far, this is the 4th that fits the archetype. As a background film it's fine, but there's not enough to hold attention, or require invested viewing. Men had its wide release on the 20th of May. It was written and directed by Alex Garland, and stars Jessie Buckley as Harper, and Rory Kinnear as every other man in the village. At its basis, another person moves to a place, and strange things happen, but it differentiates itself in a number of ways. The first is the atmosphere, as the village that Harper is vacationing in is beautiful, but also extremely isolating and lonely. The contrast between the emotions portrayed and the environment create an interesting dynamic. Another way it sets itself apart is the themes. While it's as subtle as 2 sledgehammers strapped together, it's effective in what it sets out to do, showing how awful men can be to women. It has a number of similarities with Texas Chainsaw 2, although Stretch is a more active protagonist than Harper, who just wants to enjoy a holiday. There are other metaphors as well, eating the forbidden apple in the Garden of Eden, entering a tunnel, and the use of colors to represent emotions, and they largely work. What doesn't work as well is the effects. Some of the gore is well done, and there are a few shots that still stick out, but there's a lot of CGI, especially an incredibly bizarre ending that truly has to be seen to be understood. Much of that is necessary, but there are scenes where it detracts from the horror that's going on. Still, it's a minor quibble on what is otherwise an incredibly solid and interesting film that's heartily recommended, although a warning for the squeamish as it does get quite explicit. Watcher was released on June 3rd on Shudder. It was, say it with me, written and directed by Chloe Okuno. It stars Micah Monroe, Carl Glusman, and Bern Gorman. In it, Julia and Francis have just moved to Romania. Julia begins to believe that someone is watching her, and noises at night combined with realistic dreams cause her to become increasingly paranoid. Combined with the isolation of not knowing the language, and she slowly begins to lose her grip on reality. Again, it's a familiar outline of a plot, but instead of an isolated area they're moving into, it's the culture that separates the woman from the rest of the world. It deals with a very real fear of moving to a new place and not understanding it, and how difficult that can be. She struggles to make friends, and is rebuffed by many of the locals due to her ethnicity. In many ways, the stalker and serial killer element is mere background to the real anxiety that is moving. Although it's secondary, the Watcher element comes into the forefront in the second and third acts, and the conclusion is a bit lackluster. That, combined with the disbelieving and unsupportive husband, means that it falls into some of the pitfalls of the genre. While the ending avoids the worst kind of turns, it still feels like a letdown compared to the rest of the film, which had maintained the balance better. Still, it's worth a watch. I hope you've enjoyed this week's reviews, although it came out a little later than anticipated due to computer troubles. Thank you for watching.